Jeremy, looking forward to chatting about men's work, chatting about the male experience, talking about therapy. You and I have had some good interaction online, on Twitter, here on Substack. I know we have some similar impressions, I think, around, the therapy and the male space right now. So really excited to get into it. And
Yes.
would love for you to share a little bit about you, your work. You are a licensed professional counselor. So
Yes.
you're a therapist as well. Fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, of
Not
course.
just men. We're going to talk about all sorts of good stuff. We got two male therapists here. And so it is an opportunity for us to talk a little bit about that male experience. But we want it to be inclusive, and obviously anyone is welcome. Thank
Well,
you.
absolutely. Also, the men that you love, the men in your life, what it's like interacting, male and female. We can talk about both. But my background is as an LPC. And so licensed professional counselor, and also somewhat of an academic. I've written about the mechanisms behind EMDR therapy. So we'll talk about that because that's a good therapy for men and anyone. But primarily now I am an outpatient private practice psychotherapist specializing in traumatology, EMDR therapy, exposure therapy. And I teach EMDR therapy to other therapists through a company that I work for. It's really fun. Love to teach. And obviously, you and I met through our shared love for evidence based psychotherapy approaches because you write so much about somatic work. And I'm a big fan of that. Lots of that goes into EMDR therapy. And so I've been doing that for years now and been really an advocate for men getting therapy that works for them. And that's phrased in ways that and packaged in ways that work for them because that does exist. And therapy isn't just, having coffee with a friend. That's therapeutic. But there are methods, as you know, and mechanisms that underlie effective treatment that just doesn't make for that fun rage bait content out there about how bad therapy is.
100%. And I think, I've had my own journey with this.
Right.
I definitely found, and I do find that in the therapy world, right? Like I am an outlier as a man, as more of a masculine presenting man. That is
Right.
definitely the case. It was definitely the case in my training and in my schooling. And there were a lot of eye rolls, unfortunately, when I tried to bring up some men's work and some stuff that I thought was important, which
Right.
was really disappointing to me. Let me just go do not disturb here. I got these texts. So I would actually like to start with some insight on where you think this has kind of gone wrong with the relationship between men and therapy, maybe men and our feelings. Like if you
Mhm.
were to pinpoint, and I have an idea here and I could throw it out and see what you think, to pinpoint, one of the fundamental roots here that is most likely cultural, that is leading
Sure.
into these beliefs, right? Leading into a
Yes.
lot of the resistance. And so I'd love to hear from you unless you want to hear from me, and then we could ping pong it.
Well, you mean what's gone wrong with men's mental health and why they don't get therapy, like both of those things?
Yeah, starting kind of broad. I have something specific, but let's start broad.
Yeah. So I think that there's a few good things, and this has been something I've been struggling with for the better part of 10 years. So it's a great conversation. For one, the elimination of third spaces where you have home and work, and now even that's collapsed into one space if you just work from home. Men do really well with parallel play. So there aren't really places like bowling leagues or scouts or things that are like male spaces where you can learn how to be a male and get mentorship from other dudes. So that's not there really. And men need that, right? You're not born knowing how to channel your masculinity positively. Go watch a Robert Redford movie. I just saw The Sting in theaters. It was part of Regal's, and I don't get paid by them, unfortunately, not yet, to shout that out. But they had a series of like classic movies, and you see Robert Redford and you see Paul Newman, and you get this wonderful masterclass in masculine banter. And you just don't see that in film now. You don't see it in real life. And that kind of stuff is taught and honed, right? So that's not there. The mentorship component, number one. Number two, you don't really get conversations about what being a man is because it's not really something that anyone knows how to tackle. And other men aren't really providing mentorship. And you get the online dating sphere of essentially 3 to 1 men outnumbering women, and a lot of dating being people being told, well, just go to the apps and date. And that's where you need to socialize. And it's like that's where a lot has been shuttled. And I heard from Gen Z men that when they were in high school and college, whatever, depending on their age, they had to go to Zoom school. And so they also didn't learn how to navigate interpersonal relationships in the flesh. right? Huge deficit. So I think it's a few things. It's dating being moved to a kind of dedicated channel, lack of male mentorship and male only spaces, which I think there should be female only spaces. I don't want to get too into that. Well, I can, but so romance and mentorship have really declined, and men don't reach out to talk about that as much. So there you go. Those are my starting point. Oh, and the mental health, but what's out there that makes for good talk about mental health is controversial. And so the good stuff doesn't get talked about as much. And it's up to fellow men who've had effective therapy to be open about it, right? Like many people in law enforcement and first responders, Army, veteran, cops have had EMDR therapy or exposure work for trauma and said, listen, this is not your grandma's therapy. This stuff's real. And so I'm so grateful for them being out there because therapy gets this rap as being just talking. It isn't just that. So I'll toss it back to you. Those are a few of my beginning thoughts.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'd never heard that term parallel play before, but it speaks to, right, sort of evolutionary psychology and just the
Yes, it does.
different functions and the different patterns of relatedness that are available within the different genders, right? And I think an understanding of that, an understanding of how the male brain connects, right? How the male brain relates is super, super important. And that idea of parallel play and that sort of what was coming for me was this sort of like locker room mentality, but actually not locker room mentality in some ways, right? But then
Yeah.
I think of Trump, but that sort of cohesiveness, right? That sense of being next to next with someone, right? You put two men together and they're building something or they're they're going to get vulnerable. They
Yeah.
start talking about that, right? But they're not looking at it. It's that parallel play, event
Yes.
based. There's a natural triangulation that is coming in, which creates movement, right? Which I think really speaks to the male nervous system in a lot of ways, right? Big
Absolutely.
time. I think
Yes.
that's fundamental. And then, yeah, I mean, you nailed it with obviously the eldership and the rites of passage and big part of my work. I wrote my graduate thesis on that. So we could get into that for sure. Cause there are some ingredients, right, throughout time and throughout history of, right, what are the parallels that exist within these thresholds? How do we
Yes.
shift from boy consciousness into man consciousness, right? And there are some very clear, distinct thresholds in my opinion. But I actually would like to just throw something else into the mix because I believe that so much of why men struggle today is
Mhm.
because they are deeply, deeply disconnected from their own sense of pleasure, which exists in their body and is actually rooted in deep cultural homophobia. And so men are completely disencouraged to explore pleasure, sensate being, sensate, right, sensuality in their bodies in this way that is extremely nourishing, recyclable with, right, generative in this way with somebody. And I think it really comes to this deep rooted homophobia in my personal opinion. And it's pulled men out of their bodies and pulled them away from male intimacy in some ways that are just frankly devastating. And I spend a lot of time with, my best friend is Armenian, my girlfriend is Persian. I spend a lot of time with folks from those communities, right? And it's very common. You see men holding hands, you see them kissing each other on the cheeks. There is a real intimate, erotic sense that isn't sexual, right?
Mhm.
Eroticism and sexuality is entirely different, right?
Right.
That is lacking. And not that we need to, hold hands and kiss each other on the cheeks, right? But that male intimacy. And I think it comes from that deep rooted homophobia.
Well, you know what? It's really interesting that you bring that up because in my own studies on like where the friendship and loneliness crisis has just ballooned, the idea of male friendship has really fallen by the wayside, and smoking rooms, and bowling, men's lodges, not just for Masons, but the inclusive of that, I guess, have really taken a hit as being kind of selfish or a thing that you don't need to engage in. I mean, in the church, you'll see tons of women's Bible studies, which is amazing. And then you'll see men's stuff is usually sunrise, like start at 6 or 7, so that they're not doing it at night and they can be home. Okay, cool. But there's always a sense of rushed or hurriedness to male friendship, and that just doesn't really exist in female friendship culturally. And
Mm.
the idea of male friendship being something that can quickly become labeled homosexual or gay. I have read that. I need to find the author and attribute it to them, but there was an essay that came out that was addressing just that. a year or two ago, it had me, and I really thought about that because, yeah, in previous eras, male friendship was really a part of life from the Greeks onward, right? Especially in Victorian eras. I mean, you could see things and it would come off to many modern readers as gay that wasn't. So I think the restrictive sense on male friendship and needing to be really clear and redirect all of that into a partner and be clear, like, oh, it's not gay. That is interesting because you just don't see that. That's something I've been on the soapbox on that because people want to say, well, men just aren't that way. And it's like, well, wait a minute, they do form friendship. They aren't all stoic. It isn't all stoicism all the time. There is a place for that for sure. And it's usually more male and female associated stoicism. So fine, I'll give that. I'll grant that. But also the friendship component is historical. There's a lot of friendship to be seen throughout history with men.
For sure, for sure. And yeah, I mean, I think of just, so many amazing figures that I respect. And, whether it's a C.S. Lewis or a Churchill or even Jung, and they had these really, really important sort of father archetypal type figures in their life that were sort of crucial parts of their development in some ways, right? I guess I'm kind of referring to classic, like apprenticeship, right? A classic sort of
Yeah.
mentorship, and that used to be so based within like trades and craft. And it wasn't just learning the trade and the craft. No, it was the ethics of the role in this society, right? And how
Yes,
is this,
100%.
where's the honor in this, the morality, the ethics, right? And that is another thing that is just so absent conversations around ethics, in male spaces, right? And I think it is
Yeah.
a lot of that fear, the rhetoric of, oh, you're a pussy, you're sensitive. What do you mean? We're just joking, da 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 da. There's like a levity, there's an inability to look the thing in the face because everyone is so afraid of being emasculated, right? So I
Yes.
think there's something to that too.
Yes, there is something to that. Fear of emasculation. I mean, you have to look at where it's coming from, the source, right? You have to say, how much does that matter? How much of a movement do I need to be part of to go against it? I mean, so fraternities are one of the only, if you think about it, one of the only spots left where it's a norm that men kind of spend a massive amount of time together, and care about what each other thinks that way. You could say, well, that's a very interesting sociological study because it's just they're so formalized that it's just stayed that way because there are rules in place and you're not going to move them as an outsider. But in male casual friendships in America, from the 1800s onward, probably 19th, 20th century, whenever, you could probably pinpoint mid 20th century or so where it probably really shifted into it not being male groups of friends and more when you're a guy, your best hope is to couple off, outsource the relational component to your wife, hope that that provides you a good social life, do stuff with other couples. Maybe. I mean, you see so many sitcom episodes and so many jokes about like men in a coupling, their girlfriend and wife, or excuse me, their wife or girlfriend's best friend tries to introduce her to their partner, and the two guys do or don't get along, but the girls are still going to hang out. So you got to make the best
Yeah.
of it. It's like, well, wait a minute, that's not your only route to friendship as a guy. Like that's really relatively new to say, go cathect, to use some psychoanalytic stuff, all your friendship joyous impulses into a life partner as your one main channel, everything else be damned. I like that
Yeah.
you're getting to that because that is truly not healthy. And I think also female therapists of all types, feminist therapists, non-feminist therapists, whatever, would even say, guess what? Men can't just rely on a partner. They can rely on a huge part on them, but you do, well, it's like, well, then we have to teach men. We have to give men the attention and the teaching to form that stuff, guys. Come on.
But even the idea of relying on somebody as a man,
Yeah.
right, is such a thing there. We're expected to be the needless man. You know what I mean? And
Yes.
I actually believe in that to to such an extent. Like I'm kind of a 50% red pill, 50% therapy guy. I kind of split the difference a little bit because there's a lot in there.
Yeah. Well, I would put it this way. So I always like to lean on the data because I let that do the talking. If you don't like the data, call it junk science, call it what you want, but I didn't invent it. So we know that women want a guy who is confident and who makes more money than them. Okay. So we know, listen, if I were to have a Gen Z guy in front of me who didn't know where to start, I would say, okay, well, let's look into the data. And he was trying to date. I would say, let's look into the data on who does well on dating apps, how they're stacked for you against you, and what women really find attractive based on studies that we can trust, right? Not just BuzzFeed. That's where you go. And a lot of that's going to say confidence, being taller than the woman some of the time, right? Making more money, all of these different elements. It's like, well, wait a minute, that's not great. Well, it's right there. Like that's what we have. The reality is what we have to work with. And so men are not born with all of their confidence intact. It's very weird because we have this view like if men aren't confident, oh well, like oops. Well, that's not it. That's formed. It's honed. You know, like the movie
It's, yeah.
300.
The esteem for men, I feel the self-esteem is built through doing esteemable things, right?
Oh, yes, I like that. Through action, yes, through
And where
forward
I feel like
motion.
for women, it's way more relational. And we're obviously speaking very general. And these are, I believe, evolutionary functions that we have as a result of biology. It doesn't mean that we don't have choice, that we can't override them, that there isn't nuance, right? These are just general frameworks that help to give us a general understanding of how to make sense of what we're seeing.
Absolutely. So here's the deal. So speaking from this evolutionary framework, I like this because there's so much evolutionary psychology out there now that you can become an evolutionary therapist, which is kind of the niche I'm trying to inhabit. And essentially, you could say NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, is usually like the male instinctual desire to accrue resources gone haywire and just inflated, right?
The will to power. Yeah. The will to power.
Yes, in Nietzschean term, absolutely. And then we see BPD, borderline personality disorder, is kind of more female, again, very, very general terms, associated traits gone a certain way. Now, of course, that's generalizing, but you get hyper volitionalism, hyper attentional grabbing with NPD. And it's like, well, let's look at how confidence is something that is really rewarded and considered attractive. Men have to make the first move. Again, the research is in, the data is
Yeah.
in. Women prefer a man to make the first move. So it's going to go wrong in two ways. The man's either going to be very weak willed and able to do that, or the other way it can go is he's like Johnny Bravo from the classic 90s cartoon, and everything is a false positive to him. Everything is, oh, she digs me. And evolutionarily, a false positive for man is way less costly than a false negative of, oh, I could have mated with that person but didn't. So there's a selection process for overconfidence in men because they have
Mm.
to be the volitional force. So again, we don't have to hate this stuff. Let's peel the curtain back and see how we make it work in our modern era.
Yeah, that's really brilliant. What is any insight on sort of that selection process and some of that nuance with I can't remember the phrase that you used it, not cost benefit, but cost something
False
like that.
positive.
Yeah, yeah. How does that show up in the according to the literature, the data, and the female experience? Any insight?
Well, for women, it's far more costly to pick a man who exhibits signs of being a good provider, but isn't. So for women, they are very vulnerable for 9 months. They have no ability to defend themselves. Everything hinges on their partner being strong enough to protect her and her infant developing child. And so there's going to be much more emphasis on selectivity and a false negative. It's almost reversed where it's much better to have rejected someone that could have been a great partner than it is to have died. You're looking at different mating strategies, and what it comes together perfectly is a dude who can protect you and isn't going to abuse you. So, I mean, Rob Henderson has talked about the idea of a male needing to have the capacity to defend you is very hardwired. And so, how that shows up, we just have to be aware of. Insight's the order of the day on that. So, for women, the false positive on a male would be like, okay, looks like a good partner, but dang, he isn't. And so you're stuck. And so then that leads to, well, what do I do now? I think false positive for women is if they're a good partner but aren't. And men, it would be if they're even open to mating some of the time.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I was curious on
Yep.
that. So I was also hearing too, right? I'm very interested in the dark triad psychological structure, which tends to be fairly differentiated within the male experience as well, too, right?
Okay.
And so for our listeners, right? So the dark triad is a psychological sort of organization that has been super crucial for us to understand like the human capacity for evil and for wrongdoing, right? And so there's three sort of crucial sort of characteristics that fit within that triangle. And so we have psychopathy, right? Just complete lack of empathy. Theanism, right? Which is kind of that will to power, kind of I explain it, Lord of the Rings, kind of that the guy who's like whispering in the king's ear, right? Sort of
Well, the
positioning
vizier.
themselves around power. And then narcissism, Exactly. Exactly. And so my belief is that we all have these characteristics on a spectrum, right? And in order to sort of as a man and in my experience, and this is kind of a funny term that I've coined, in order to live a light triad lifestyle, I
Yeah.
have to integrate my dark triad qualities, right? I only know true empathy through my own impulse for sadism, right? I only know altruism through my own instinct to be self oriented and self serving, right?
Yeah.
And when you fully know and accept that and understand how the tendrils of that manifest in your life, then you have enough of that awareness, insight, metacognition, whatever, to make a new choice. And I personally believe that you have to go through the negative polarities of this triangle to flip it on its head to get that light triad
Yeah.
lifestyle, right?
I like that. Yeah, I mean, you can look at Aristotle and you can see. I know Dr. Paul has been in our audience, and he and I have done some podcasts, quite a few. He likes to talk about Aristotle. It's funny because I studied Aristotle and his rhetoric and poetics in high school, and the development of logos, pathos, ethos, right, in your arguments, and going through an understanding emotional impact on things and your own emotions. Are you just making it an argument from pathos, from emotion? And so I agree with you. I think there's one thing the Christian community could do better. As a Christian myself, I'll just go ahead and say I'm not a hater, but I also see through the veil of false religiosity. And so meekness is not weakness. Let's jot that down. Meekness is a decision from strong men to say, I'm going to lead in a righteous way. If you're weak, you can't really be meek because you're just afraid. You're already weak. Like, and also if you have no sensual drive, your chastity doesn't need to be lauded because you didn't overcome temptation. So we live in a weird Christian post-consumer world now that isn't helping men as much in the church. I'm sorry. Some are, but by and large, the church needs to help with it more with our crisis in masculinity. And so basically, the light tray would look like saying, look, I have a sin nature, I have evil. Let me look at it and see what my temptations are, and then let me learn how to conquer it. Pray to God to get through it. Use your whatever religion you are, come to grips with it and move through it. And again, that gets so much into EMDR, gets so much into face the temptation, desensitize. But you're blind when you don't face your self serving nature. And if you just believe you're good because you exist, that's a very dangerous thing. Anything you do is good then. And we live in a world of that. When we're good consumers, we're bad lovers. That's my new
Right.
motto because when you learn that everything you want, you deserve, and you can click a button or swipe on it, you become horrible to deal with. So I love that. Yes, I had a friend who talked about this idea that meekness is not weakness. It's going through and deciding to be gentle, a decision to be gentle. You can only be righteous when you're deciding against evil, not when you don't have, not when you're too scared to do evil. It's not righteousness then.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love that. I love how you framed that. Another thing that I'm curious about, and I hear this a lot sort of in the Christian community and, the communities that I'm involved in, especially from women, that there's a lot of frustration around, how do I want to say this? The sense that men have been stripped and robbed of their own anger and kind of aggression and sort of vitality, which I believe when it's aligned, that leads to vitality, right? My anger, my aggression, that fire in my belly, right? That is the same fuel that burns into my vitality, right? But I believe that men have been culturally conditioned away from their aggression, away from their anger, away from their sword, right? In this kind of depth psychology sense. And I'm curious if you have any resistance to that or if you see that as well, or what comes up from you when you hear me say that. And this is only from my own experience of really finally accepting and learning and moving through my own anger and understanding the fuel that has come from the back end of that and the call to action that has come from the back end of that.
Well, I couldn't love that more. I agree. I'll double down on it. And let me just say, when it comes to aggression, um, we need Freud and Christianity would have more in common than he would care to admit because he started out, I mean, he views humanity in its basic state as evil. And so would Christianity. He would say, well, there's sin or there's just the will to live. And so you have you then have to tame that and live in a society. And so aggression as a way to defend the righteous man, the sheepdog, to defend the sheep against the wolf is necessary, no matter what culture you're in or what time. And so basically, you have groups that have had people at the speaker saying this is what women want, and then speaking for all women, and then other women say, well, wait a minute, that's not true. I don't want a man who is basically exactly like me. I want a man who is strong. I want a man who has a different personality. And so those women don't get hurt as much. Now they are, but I think we have to say, well, for women who have, and this is where we can talk as therapists too, women that have had severe trauma and are scared of any male aggression, therapy exists. And that's not an insult. I hate when people say get help as an insult. No, no, I mean authentically therapy to learn that some men are terrible, yes, but then others who will use their aggression to protect you if that ever needed to happen, that's righteous. That's helpful, right? There's a difference. So trauma teaches us to fear anything unknown or suspenseful. And that's where fear of all male aggression or male anger or vitality comes from. It's trauma and it's curable, full stop. So that's number one. Number two, men need to know who they can be themselves around because it's a huge, again, false negative and positive. A false positive that you can be yourself around the wrong person for men is very dangerous because I want to be careful. Some men, you don't want to frighten the wrong person. You don't want to get canceled. You don't want to, whatever. But a false negative of holding back and saying, well, I couldn't trust that person, that's become increasingly less risky. So basically, men need to learn. I mean, showing your anger and showing your aggression is pretty risky. So you need to be able to show anger in a way that's adaptive. And you need to take your aggression to the gym. You need to take it into areas where, again, historically men have done that because male aggression has been a part of all human history evolutionarily. And so it has to be discussed. And women who find it attractive when a man has righteous indignation and can use it have to be willing to speak up and not alienate yourself, but basically point the difference. Christ had righteous indignation. He turned the tables on the Pharisees. And that's in the Bible for a reason, right? We Christians believe everything in the Bible is there for a reason. Look at the examples of Moses and his indignation when he left and came back and his countrymen were worshiping a golden calf. Like, male anger has been a force that has done good. So we can't
Mhm.
throw the baby out with the bathwater. We have to say, to what extent and how do we show it? And those are the famous words as therapists. It's all about magnitude and frequency.
Big time. Oh, yeah, we can get into that a little bit too. But it to kind of put a button on some of this, right? Especially the evolutionary psychology piece is like there's always been, within men, there's been like a bit of a, I don't want to say tug of war, but the idea of amorality as such a driving function within society and tribal societies, right? So there are so many men that are amoral because they're psychopathic, they're amoral, right? They're that dark
Yeah.
triad, etc. And there is also a necessity for amorality to an extent that is chosen from the place of righteousness. Does that connect with you at all?
Say it again. So the place of amorality that's chosen. Tell me a little bit more what you mean by that.
Sort of what you were saying, right? And talking about that righteous indignation, right? Like it
Mhm.
is sometimes a little bit of maybe not amorality, right?
Mhm.
But the aggression, the anger, the hard choice, etc., is needed for the bigger picture, right? For the
Yeah,
group, etc. And I'm being super careful with my words because I don't want them to be misconstrued because
you're
it's
not.
it's it's a very fine line, right? But there are amoral men that exist, and a lot of these men run the fucking world because they live in this dark triad, etc. And
Mhm.
our society, our culture has put that presentation up on a pedestal.
That's
Women are
true.
attracted to it. It equates to sex, equates to success. It equates to all of these things. And so I believe that there is a necessity for the good men to meet that amorality with eyes wide open,
Yeah,
with eyes wide fucking open. And that
100%.
that's what I'm saying.
No, that resonates completely with me. And I would say anger isn't a sin. The Bible says be angry and sin not. Great men throughout the Old Testament and the New have had anger issues. Peter cut off someone's ear who was trying to arrest Christ on the day that Christ was apprehended at Gethsemane. So, I mean, you have to look at, again, human nature. And I think sociology and the models of, raise human beings one way and they'll go like, so behaviorism and the idea of, I think it was John B. Watson who said, give me a child and I'll turn him into either like a beggar or a businessman or greatest success. Well, we know now that's really untrue. Genetic studies come out all the time. Predispositions exist. You have to look at that. So you can have someone who, like the author of, I think it's called The Psychopath Inside, who's like a neuroscientist who's very high in psychopathy, right? So, okay, well, he spent it was James Fallon. So he spent his career studying the brain and not hurting people. even though he's kind of low on empathy. Yay. That's what to do. If you, right? Like, I'm not
Yeah.
blind to the brain science, but you still have a choice on what you do when you realize you don't have empathy or fear on a neurotypical level. And so the righteous men who have a moral code have to say, look, I'm going to take a stand when I need to, and I'm going to speak about positive masculinity and what that looks like. And we need allies. We need women who say, men deserve to be treated well, and nobody gets something for nothing, right? Like we have to help each other, and not to sound too Machiavellian, but there's this idea that women need to always sacrifice all the time, no matter what, or that men need to always sacrifice all the time, no matter what, and that's manhood. God dang it, is nothingness and just dying for everyone. Not necessarily. I don't think a society can survive on that. I know it can't actually for
Yeah.
anyone. So the
Eros.
yeah, the what?
Eros.
Yes,
Eros, yeah. The moisture, right? So many men are just so dry of the moisture of life, that eros, which
yeah.
again, for me, goes back to this fear of pleasure and fear of the body and fear of being out of control.
Really like that. Yes. So the fear of being out of control is huge. I mean, that leads to so much neuroticism. I mean, that's the foundation
Except,
of being neurotic in Freud's words.
oh yeah, significant. It's underneath every every disorder or diagnosis, just about.
Well, that reminds me, like, look at the men who are paying for these retreats to go basically LARP, to live action role play as like a soldier, or they're transmuting their desire for pleasure into this sort of almost desire for pain. And there's nothing
It's a
wrong with wanting to go be a first responder soldier. Let me really hit that and disclaim that. But
100%.
I think there is a craving that men have to be in touch with sensory experiences, like you said. And the men who are the driest, they make really good defenders in some ways, or really good sacrificers, but they don't have the eros, they don't have the joie de vivre, the sort of love of life and ability to woo that a seducer does. Not that you need to be one, but you need to, as a man, be good at initiating and flirting. When you're really dry and have no capacity to savor life, you will not be a good flirt. You will not be good at connecting with women.
And for sure, for sure. And the people who are most seductive, they're seducing life and the flirtatiousness. Like, like I flirt with men, not in a sexual way, right? But it's this life, it's this eros, it's this flirtatious essence, like
Okay.
truly. And when done right, I mean, it can be incredibly disarming, And I'm an outlier because I have a huge capacity for femininity and my art, my creativity, and I have a huge feeling function, and I'm an outlier in that way, and I fit in perfectly in all like the feminine spaces, like queer spaces, like I fit right in. But then you put me on the basketball court, whatever, or you put me on a jujitsu mat, like I fit right in too, right? Like I can find
Mhm.
kind of feel both those spaces. But for me, like, and I'm not afraid of saying this, like I have to have like skin to skin, like male contact in my life, like pick up basketball, like wrestling, like activity, like there is also it increases testosterone. It is a natural thing. Getting other men's sweat on you increases your testosterone, right? And so there is something that is singular that exists within a fully male space that has permissiveness for some of the aggression, some of the anger, some of the loudness, some of the messiness, some of the opportunities to be challenged and
Yeah.
right? Like it
Yeah.
only exists, and it's a cohesive, it creates cohesiveness within a group of men, right? These are sports, these are teams, etc. And that is very dangerous. Groups of men that are cohesive and aligned and together in a group is very dangerous, right?
Yeah.
To people. So I think it's discounted. And I think some of it is kind of intentional. They want men alone. They want them stripped away from the eros.
Well, I would say this. I love where we're going. You think of professional wrestling, like the WWE or AEW. You've got the skin to skin stuff. You've got the pageantry of it. You've got 300. Talked about that with Dr. Paul, and I saw the movie when it was out, and years and years ago. Like the camaraderie there among the Spartans and Gerard Butler. So it's just an interesting. Like I love that point, and it's a new retreat opportunity. There you go, a new offering, a new course. But I think you bring up the other thing that I've noticed throughout my years as a therapist that I'm sure you have as well, of whenever, even in that article that Nature just released about, are young men really having a difficult time? I'm not quoting the exact title. We can put it in the show notes, or I can find it and quote it. But it's the newest article saying like, well, we don't want to discount women. And I agree that we don't. Let's get that straight up. And I also agree that there seems to be something where I think there's a fear, and I don't know if even people always know to call it that. There's a fear of when you tell men that they're entitled to be treated a certain way, that they're going to be very imperious and take it, right? Like they're like, oh, men are having a problem. Well, that's, you can't really say that because they're going to then go be manipulative or feel entitled. And that's going to be dangerous if they assemble in a group. And it's like, well, wait a minute. That doesn't, just go see, if you were to say every woman deserves a partner, you probably wouldn't flip a lot of people out. But if you said every guy deserves a girlfriend, you would really flip people out. They'd be like, well, that means he's going to go take one like a war bride. And I think part of
Mhm.
that's evolutionary because a woman not having a child means eggs are lower count than sperm. So that was a huge missed opportunity that she didn't procreate. But men are seen as cheaper. And maybe evolutionarily they are. But if
Yeah.
they all feel that they are, but the kings and the 1%, you end up with the pre industrial tribal societies that humanity organized so much to get out of.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's really insightful. I think that's super insightful. The other thing that that came to mind for me, and then I want to talk a little bit about sort of the manosphere and that
Yeah.
documentary that just came out, but mention kind of just, the dating market and the apps and all of that stuff. And I feel that we, both men and women have been we've all collectively been conditioned to believe that attraction is a visual thing, and that is an aspect of it, right? But it is way more pheromonal
Yeah.
and energetic. I think generally in the world, we rely way too much on our visual sense. I think there's a lot of Maya within that, right? And that sort of illusionary sense. And we do
I like
take in
that.
like 90% of our stimulus through our visual cortex. And as somebody who does EMDR, right, how much stress we hold within that. And we could talk about all of that. So but anyways, yeah, with the whole apps and just kind of the market these days and OnlyFans, whatever, we've all been so trained and conditioned to this visual instinct, this visual impulse, this visual attraction. And I think that it really, really discounts our biology. I think it really discounts the way that attraction works, and it leads to a lot of confusion for people.
Yes. So a few things there. I mean, because I've heard so many different arguments. I've heard, well, the top percent of men do really well on dating apps visually, and it's actually very competitive. And then you hear some women have said, like a comment I read said, well, several comments that, well, what do you expect? Basically, when all you have is pictures, that's all you can go by. Okay, I get that. So, but that's saying, you're going to go fish and you're going to use, a toothpick. Like, well, that's all I have. Well, yeah, but we need to build a fishing rod. We need to build something better. And some people have tried that. I think it's that we're scaling and optimizing for addictiveness whenever it's apps.
Yeah.
So you're always going to have, now that they've unlocked open Pandora's box on the trading card facet of like, get a little card, swipe left or right on it. That's just a thing now. When that was discovered, that became the arms race ticket of the most addictive thing to suck the most of your time and money. So basically, if you want to thrive, the problem is that you can't thrive that way of just narrowing someone into, like you said, this illusory component, this hypervisual stimulus. And so getting back in touch with, you know, someone you're attracted to, but also not just physical, but their voice, touch elements, time, retraining your capacity for working memory and for attention span a bit at a time, coming to terms with the fact that there are more elements to a person. And again, it doesn't have to be something you do all at once. It just being curious, talking to people and talking a little longer than maybe you would have, or listening a little longer than you would have. But I think,
Mhm.
yeah, that's what I would say. Don't take dating advice or be hyper connected with people who are very bitter, because a lot of people get their dating advice from TikTok or places where people are just so bitter. And that's going to be what you're consuming and feeding on, what you become.
Without a doubt. And that's what you're going to bring in. Right. And of course, you meet somebody on an app, right? You see them in person, you're going to have that opportunity to feel it out. Right. But the challenge of that is that for most of us, we've already created some story as to who this person is based off of our own projective identification as to whatever we're getting from the app. Where if you were to meet somebody in the real
Yeah.
world, you're having this neuroceptive experience. Your nervous systems are communicating with one another through neuroception, and you're going to have a much
Yeah.
greater sort of felt sense of that. And it's going to act against, not always, but some of that projective identification, which comes from the apps. you think you already know who this person is because of their job and they like this and they show up, and you're showing up with this full loaded chamber of expectation and ideal, right? And so
Yeah.
I think that's another huge part of it.
No, it absolutely is. So that's the thing is expectate. People say comparison is the thief of joy, and I would add expectation there of this is going to be the one right away, and it's going to be packaged that way, and I'm gonna and just the we almost have acquired borderline personality disorder from dating apps where everything becomes so all or nothing. There's no
Yeah.
savoring the experience. It becomes either your partner of all time or oh my gosh, what a waste. And it just, we can't live that way. Our nervous systems are not evolved for constant, chronic stress. So acute stress to fight and flee, fine. When you fled, your brain gets the signal, okay, I'm out of the danger. But chronic stress, constant, is so damaging and warps our sense of safety and what we move toward. And so uh, I agree with you. I think there's some very good stuff there. Be in tune with your interoceptive sense. Know why you feel a certain way. Don't be easily, mystification was the old term for gaslighting. So
Mm.
greats like R.D. Laing, who I don't agree with everything he did, like, thinking schizophrenia is a condition you develop versus like a more genetic thing. We know more now. But, him talking about mystification of people being told, oh, you're hungry. It's like, no, actually, you're tired or angry. We're told now, like, depending on how alienated we are from our bodies from being on Zoom all day, we're told, we're angry at this person or that person. Our sense, our interoceptive sense and with how we feel in the body is so easily attributed to stuff by other people now. What a good point, man. You led me to think of that. I appreciate that. Somatic work is so important.
Big time. Big time. Yeah, there's so much more to that. Well, save some of that maybe for a part two.
Sure.
'Cause I could go deep. I could go deep into that. But
Yeah.
I'd love to chat a little bit about, well, there's a big conversation going on right now about this documentary. I've been seeing a lot of content about it.
Oh,
I haven't created any content about it. I did make one little video. I had a pretty I had a real reaction to that documentary, and it's a bit of a contrarian take. It's not the reaction I think most folks would have, but I'd love to hear from you a little bit as, maybe you could set the stage for this conversation and this documentary and we go from
oh
there.
yeah. So we've got because I did my homework. I did a response to it with Dr. Paul, who's a psychiatrist and been in practice longer than me. And then I am one of those kind of well, is the term extremely online? Maybe you could say I'm intensely online, a little bit under the extreme. Because, we've met on X and talked, and you and I, that's how we encountered each other. And I see what people post on there. I've known about the manosphere for at least the last, I don't know, 8, 9 years. So this documentary from Louis Theroux, who's a very esteemed British documentarian, comes out, and it's inside the manosphere, whatever it was titled, and it's a like an expose of different manosphere characters. Now I will say some of the people in the manosphere who were founders were not in there or were only clipped, and so you've got a 23-year-old named Harrison who's British, who does cryptocurrency stuff. Some of it turns out to not be lucrative for people to get involved just for him. So it focuses on him. It focuses on Myron Gaines from Fresh and Fit, who again did not invent the manosphere. It focuses on Louis going in, looking at what the men are saying, looking at the spectacle of the podcast where women and men kind of combat each other and exposing like how reductive the gender narratives are on it and really exposing the characters and showing, that some of them come and another one, Justin, who
Waller.
is it? What?
Justin
Yeah,
Waller.
Justin Waller, who does real estate work and is part of it. Again, someone in the manosphere, but there wasn't this look back at who started. So anyway, it goes through and it looks at the sort of the forced open, not for the open relationship on one side for a man to have more than one partner was explored on Justin
Mhm.
Waller's end.
And
Um,
Myron's too.
and Myron's in. Yes. And then that was something came of that, like Myron and his girlfriend then broke up, apparently. So that's what that is the what I took away from there was that there was tons of exposure of people who are tangential or who, yeah, they're part of the manosphere now, but it didn't trace the rise of it from the pickup artist community
Yeah.
to the current state of it or why it evolved, why people wanted it there, what happened in culture. That's what I noticed, is it didn't treat it like, here's what led up to a manosphere being established.
That's the documentary I would like to watch because I mean, me too. I mean, I was reading Neil Strauss's The Game at like 16 years old. Like, what is that going to do to a male developing brain that is going to gamify an entire opposite half the world,
Yeah,
right? And all of this sexual energy flowing through a 16-year-old body, right? I mean, like, just horrible, horrible messaging at such a crucial time period. But again, the trap of all of this is that red pill manosphere shit works in the short term. It is a short term solution for a lot of stuff, right? But it
it is.
opens up so many big problems and doors, and it's obviously not great for our mental health and really our sense of sovereignty as individuals, you know what I mean? But and so yeah, I'm really interested in that, actually, the progression of that, from Neil Strauss and from that pickup community to where we're at now. If you have any insights on that, and then I'll share a little bit about what I thought about the documentary.
I'll share what I thought. So, for one, part of it is men aren't understanding what they need to do to be attractive and be successful. Many men have a very masochistic streak. Now we can tie it in to some of your work on, well, they've been taught pleasure is bad or wrong or hedonistic or homosexual, right? So, a lot of men can get trapped into thinking that being too available, too nice, too giving up front is how to win a woman. And it will not always do that. It will cause you to seem like a mark, like you could say simp, you could say a sap, you could say the nice guy. And instead, you have to demonstrate that you have self worth and you're your own origin point. Now, there's nothing wrong with those things. The problem is when you add on to it and you say, well, all women are going to doubt you if you don't have the ability to cheat right here and now, or you need to keep them suspenseful that you might cheat and keep up a sense of dread. That's going to be manipulative, and you're going to, yeah, you will attract certain women who are addicted to drama. Just like if you teach women, here's how to find a guy who will pay for you everything right away, you're going to find men with poor boundaries who have issues where they think that's how you like. So it's what you're selecting to attract. So the
Hmm.
manosphere really first pick up artistry, and then the online dating sphere of why don't they text back? What do I do? How do I text better? How do I not seem too available? How do I avoid this and that? Therapists and a lot of mainstream men were not providing that content because, and I don't want to be too rude, but a lot of men, when they marry, it's the wife and kid, they don't pay forward or mentor other dudes. And that's fine, but women do that. There's a sisterhood, there's old wives' tales, there's women teaching other women how to attract, how to, drop the handkerchief, so to speak, how to meet the men that you need to. And now women don't even have. I had a female client years ago. It's not breaking any HIPAA. I'm not going to be specific, but her mom didn't really teach her how to talk to guys or how to attract a guy to talk to her without seeming desperate or like at all, like how to talk at all to guys. So I don't want to be, I want to say that's happening in both genders. I just know it more from the male perspective because I've heard about it more with men. But
Hmm.
basically, the manosphere evolved. People weren't talking about how to navigate this new world of online dating and be attractive but not manipulative, right? To show your virility and what you offer as a man. And so these other voices came up and taught game, but for dating, and went really far with it, saying this is what to do to really optimize. And so that wasn't explained at all. What wasn't explained was what kind of was how the OnlyFans and Manosphere can compete and have like almost a WWE fake feud and both make money from each other. He addressed that a little, but that's a lot of what's happening now.
It's
So yeah, I'll toss it to you, but I think it would, I'll land the plane and say what could have been offered very mysteriously absent statistics on men falling behind the world and not being more young men than young women being out of a relationship, not being in one, and how we need to
yeah.
fill it with positive voices that say how you do that stuff. I'll kick it to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, man. And it is. And like, I got so deep into the red pill space that I then had a total reaction in the opposite direction. So I totally lost the thread of that, how it has now evolved into this whole looks maxing into this now is black pill, right? Which is just so nihilistic,
Midtown
right?
and going to
So, what I found that was really interesting for me in watching the documentary was the two different sort of types of men that we saw there. I mean, we obviously have, the manosphere guy is kind of this caricature sort of alpha, playing into that. And then on the other side with the director, That for me did not feel like an accurate representation of masculinity as well either, because he really was posturing this whole kind of like gotcha attitude,
Yeah.
gotcha, this whole thing, which for me, I don't want to say it read very feminine, but I am saying it read very feminine. It turned me off because I couldn't trust what I was getting from that man. The other men, yes, I disagreed with just about everything that came out of their mouth, but there was some consistency and I knew who they were and knew who I was getting. And I didn't feel like that from the director. I really did not. The lack of predictability and congruency in that made me not trust him, made me feel like he wasn't somebody that I would want to have in the trenches shoulder to shoulder. Right.
Yeah.
And I think
Right.
a lot of men, whether they know it or not, they filter things through that kind of perspective
Oh,
because it
yeah.
is evolutionary. Right. And so, like, I'd much rather have those other guys next to my shoulder. And it's not because they're bigger or muscular. It's because I don't like them, but at least there's a little bit of trust and I know what I'm gonna get.
Yeah, knowing what you're gonna get and authenticity are very important. I mean, you look at it was very interesting because he had to so Thoreau had to kind of adjust to the fact that those dudes were gonna have their own cameras and roll. And he was like, "Well, why are you rolling? I'm not content." Well, but they're content for you. So who's content and who's not? Everyone's content. That's the real meta message behind all of this is we're all content, and are we much the worse or better for it? You decide, audience. In real time, you have to make the decision. How do you market yourself? Because you always are. And so Justin Waller and his wife, say what you will about them. Justin was very high ambition. And men can take away that build something, right? Build something and have some charisma and panache. You don't have to have two wives or a wife and a girlfriend. Nobody, they're saying, people are saying, be yourself, do this, do that. Women get told a lot to do that's very direct and sometimes very rude and cruel, but they are told. Men are told basically, figure it out, but if you give the wrong answer, you're effed. Men aren't given the answers to the test. Even if the answers are cruel and superficial, they're told, figure out what's on the test, but if you fail, you're out. I think we need to tell men, go work out, be groomed, groom yourself. Maybe you don't have to look smacks, but you do have to do something. And a lot of these men are disillusioned because no one's being honest with them about the fact that something is expected from you, but people aren't telling you. And so they become
Mm,
bitter and they listen to people who say, yeah, F women. That's not the message to take from it. The message is we need honesty. We need authenticity.
I like that. This lie that there's nothing expected of men in
Yeah.
the world is a huge, huge thing. And it is a silent killer because it is communicated in every other way. Maybe not direct and verbal, but it is communicated every other way. And men feel that and intuitively sense that. And I think that cognitive dissonance is one of the it just leads to so much isolation and anti sort of dependence, right? The
Yes.
idea of needs, right? My goodness, I have needs. Somebody else has needs. And we're talking about the extremes here, right? But these are the patterns. These are the patterns that lead into that.
We've taught men to hate each other and and have a hyper scarcity mindset. So if you want to destroy people, you need to teach them to isolate. You need to teach. It's almost like the screw tape letters from C.S. Lewis, like but for gendered. Like, how do you teach men to destroy themselves? Well, you tell them not to do anything, to be themselves, even when they don't know what that means, because no one really does until you get to
Yeah.
know yourself. Teach them not to be excellent, to kind of just sit around and do nothing. Give them endless dopamine, visual stimuli, and teach them that other men are always their enemies and sort of a crab in the bucket mentality. And then they'll destroy themselves for you. They'll keep fighting. And so you look at the past, you see men who, I mean, men have always been the more aggressive in group fighting gender because, again, like evolutionarily, a man wants to ensure his opportunity to mate, and men are stronger. So it used to be more brutal mating environment. But I think there also was much more gentlemen's agreements. Like that term came up in this movie, The Sting. And I was like, wow, don't really hear that anymore. Don't hear about gentlemen at all. It's very interesting. So even though now we're more gentle in many ways than ever, again, you could argue you can't be a gentleman unless you come to terms with and integrate your ferocity. But so we need that. We need men to go through rites of passage. We need, whether that's EMDR therapy, whether that's mentorship, and they need to understand no matter your height, no matter your weight, your genetics, you can make yourself more appealing and show that you have something to offer.
Yeah.
And other men aren't your enemy. Everyone's not going to take your girl. Like it's not, I think that separate men get in a player versus player environment on dating apps and social media, and it can't all be frame mogging. You know, you can frame mog, you can have competition, but it's not all that.
That's so funny, man. You know the nomenclature better than I do, that's for sure. But it's
Thank
good because this
I
is the
just
rhetoric. These and it's also mimetic, which is what's so wild about it. And then the internet is just a forcing function for that. But it's a very mimetic sort of thing.
Yes, you're making me think of Rene Girard, and you're also making me think of like you are taught mimetic desire, right? Like you are jealous, you learned a lot to desire from what other people desire. We talking about that too? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's so social media and cancellation and policing and kind of this panopticon, or for people who haven't heard that term, the all-seeing eye of the state of the entertainment complex, like is how I would put it, of you are constantly observed, and people will take that different ways through their temperament, right? Some people thrive on it, but it's very neuroticism inducing if you and you're trained to rat out everyone and point the finger and be very quick to dogpile. Again, we can't do that, and men aren't as much. Men will do that, but like you said about Louis, I mean, he's done some really great work, and I think seeing that Manosphere documentary with no history. I mean, somebody who's 23, there's no way they invented the manosphere. We didn't invent it. Really, the Gen Xers did that. And Neil Strauss now does a lot more stuff about trauma recovery.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so he kind of
That book.
jumped out and went to something else, which so much the better. It's some pretty good stuff.
Yeah. I mean, that book that he wrote, The Truth, I don't know if you're familiar on it. It's like a
Haven't
master
read it in a
class.
while.
Yeah. In looking at sex addiction and trauma and sexual trauma and how this manifests. Like I love his trajectory, and I really kind of came up, like a lot of my intellectual roots are actually connected more to like the mythopoetic men's movement of the 80s, right?
Okay.
Looking at the Robert Bly's, that book
Iron
Iron
John.
John. Yeah, right. Robert Greene, all these kind of like neo-Jungian guys.
Yeah.
That's really my roots of it, right? And then I love the myths of masculine development as well, right? I mean, I always talk about the Fisher King. I just believe it is so
Hmm.
potent about what it tells us about how a man turns on his masculine fire, right?
Yes.
And yeah, through empathy. And there's a reason why, in throughout so many of these amazing stories, there's these motifs of an older grizzled man and a young innocent girl or woman, because it's about this, the relationship between power and innocence, right? This sort
Yes.
of this dance between these two correlating energies that are quantumly entangled in whatever way. You can't sort of have one without the other. It's always adjacent, right?
Mm,
And
yeah.
so, and I really believe this, right? That like, and again, I meant because it's just coming from me, but I believe that a man really turns on his generative masculinity, his masculine fire, through his relationship to innocence and empathy. Like it's through understanding our own capacity for, I don't know, for the feminine. I guess I'm getting a little anima integration here, right? But can't have one without the other.
No, you
So,
can't. I mean, when people when soldiers and first responders have to turn off their hypervigilance and tap, it can be difficult. So they're trying to tap into that civilian life and the love of smelling the flowers, and you can't do that if you're afraid that right around the corner there's going to be an improvised explosive device or a sniper, right? And so there's a sort of chronic hypervigilance that people can get locked into when they're in hypermasculine careers. Well, EMDR and desensitization exposure therapies help with that a lot and teach you that I mean, you can have your cake of masculinity and eat it too. You can be stoic to an extent, and you can be aware that things can suck and you need to be ready to act. But you also have to have moments of savoring the present and know that certain environments are safe, that certain times and spaces are safe. So I think we lose that. There's the hyper therapeutic people who think everything needs to be about safety all the time and comfort. And then there's the hyper masculine. And I don't even want to say that because that ruins the term masculine. There's the hyper angry, bitter people who say therapy is weak, it's for weaklings. Well, I think therapy is anytime someone's nervous system gets stuck in a certain gear. But we don't advertise it that way. You and I do, but not everybody because they have their own agendas. Like that's another thing is that whenever a profession doesn't have men in it, I'm not knocking it. The therapy profession has a lot of women, a lot of moms, and if they're good wives, they're not going to go spend tons of time with men. And I don't mean that. I want to be really careful. There's not as much male mentorship in this profession because some of the time women aren't going to gravitate to go mentor men. Like I've had female mentors who were amazing, but they weren't married yet and they didn't have kids yet. I think what happens in our profession or anytime there's not men somewhere is you're not going to get the camaraderie because people sort along gender lines unless they're dating often, right? I don't know if you've noticed this, but the fewer men are in this profession, it's not when there's one woman in the room and a bunch of men, they're probably going to compete for attention. But I don't know that it doesn't work the same when there's one man with many women, right? In the therapy profession, at least. I've brought that up a few years ago, and a male colleague was like, "Yeah, that makes sense."
Yeah, I think so. That feels intuitive to me. That definitely is resonant.
So we have to be there. We have to have camaraderie and do like have these kind of talks and welcoming women. And there's lots of women who want authentically masculine men and they aren't, it's not in a manipulative way. Some will leverage that. And that's the bad actors come in. And you've got like the trad life movement being used by either side in a very manipulative way because it can be used to manipulate women and men. That whole trad movement, there's been bad
Oh, yeah, yeah,
actors on
yeah.
both sides of that.
There's gotta be. 100%. 100%. I'm curious.
What
I hear a lot from the women that I've worked with that they struggle with male vulnerability and struggle with a immediate sort of sense of reaction, embodied reaction of kind of disgust that comes up when there is male vulnerability. And so I'm curious if you have any sort of insight, for women, right? Or what men may need in those moments of vulnerability and how difficult it is, right, for a man to be vulnerable with his partner and let down the shield for a second and expose some of these other aspects of self. What do you think men really need in their vulnerability from a partner?
Okay, and you said you've had to navigate when women are disgusted by the vulnerability?
Correct. With the ick, right? We hear about this
Yeah.
all the time.
So I think it needs to be so I've talked about this before. So your vulnerability with a partner needs to come probably a little bit after you've established the attraction. I mean, if it's your partner, then already you've established that. But I think there needs to be a focus on kind of what your partner can offer that's a unique perspective. So guys will often enjoy the more relational perspective women offer. I've had it's very interesting because I've had female clients and their male their male partners had clinical depression for a long time and they stuck with them, but just had to at some point cut bait because they weren't able to support both of them or it was just so draining. So there needs to be a focus on, what you're doing to get back in and kind of a celebration of the guy and what his potential is. And so as Dr. Paul put in the chat here, like, you're respectable even when vulnerable. That would be something to remind the guy. Like, so
Yeah.
for and to its personality too. So for high achievement focused women, they're gonna need to be reminded they've still got it, right? Like they can still do great work. That's a lot of the time the base setting for many men is you've still got it. You can do this. Like if a man loses his job, guess what you didn't lose? Your competencies, the thing that helped you get the job, your mojo, whatever that is, boiling down like your verbal skill, your math skills, your charisma, your heart, your diligence, your endurance, whatever it is. So for the women out there, they have to realize what is it that gives you the ick about it? Because this is another thing. People will say, oh, I don't know, I got the ick, I just do. Or I don't know, it just is. Well, you need to know. So maybe not to change, like to say it's okay and just drive through it. Fine, you don't have to, but you need to at least know why something turns you off. Like that's a big thing to me is you can't just say, oh, that's just how it is. I think that's a big problem in this romance world now is people say, oh, that's it, done. Well, why? Like that doesn't mean you owe the person to be with it even when you don't feel it, but you need to understand yourself and others. And so if you get the ick from someone being vulnerable, understand if it's because you're afraid they're not going to be able to protect you or whatever the deep dark reason is, because all vulnerability is not the same. If you're feeling vulnerable and you're letting out like, wow, this is an uncontrollable situation and I feel vulnerable, that's a lot different than, oh, I don't know how to do anything. And right. So I would say the partners need to understand what gives them the ick and the person who needs that space needs to think about maybe getting a therapist potentially who works well with masculinity, and that what the end state is, what you need to feel supported. What do you need? Is it just knowing that your partner's there, that you could talk to them when you need it? Is it, do you need to vent after work and say, man, this is really out of my control and sucks? And how do you get that across? Can you say it in a way that's less, because sometimes it's the male aggression thing comes up, like, oh, it seems like they're angry at me. Well, can you share it in a way that doesn't seem like you're angry at the partner? That's a big one.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I
I
love that
appreciate
answer.
it.
And I think, well, what's kind of interesting about it, and to kind of clarify my observation, is what I see a lot, and I think you see it online too, is a woman wanting vulnerability from their partner, and then they
Yeah.
get it, and then it's, oh, but not that kind,
Yeah.
not like that, right?
Right.
And there's something really interesting there. There's something really interesting there.
The partner needs to say what kind they meant. And again, I'm not ignorant to the nature of romance. I would say there is a lot that can be unspoken, and there's a lot of magic. I think we over therapize, but not on this. Like, funny how that works. Like, okay, so then what kind of vulnerability do you want? Does that, let me just be clear. If you mean I want a guy who's going to listen to me more and handle my emotions more, but not have his own, just say that, because some men will go for that, not all. And if they don't go for it, then they're not the guy for you, and you save yourself some time. But
Yeah.
basically, that's another thing is, I'm an empath, okay? Or are you a highly sensitive person who feels your own emotions really intensely? Because that's different, right? A
Yeah.
really empathic person does feel others' emotions. Highly sensitive person is always sensitive to their own offenses. And the terms get used so interchangeably now. People don't know what they're talking about.
They don't. I think it's hyper attunement. You're not an empath, you're hyper attuned to everyone around you.
I like that
Because you,
term. I think
yeah,
that's
it's a
accurate.
survival thing, because they're too porous. Their nervous systems are too porous, right? Too
Yeah.
many of the neuroceptive signals and everything from other people is getting in. You feel all of it, right? And so you're just
Yeah.
very, very attuned. But it's nuanced there. But I also have the same reaction when people refer to themselves as an empath all
Yeah.
the
Well,
time.
I love your shirt because I watched Dragon Ball Z and I grew up on it. And so I think we get models of masculinity there. We've got positive male anger there and negative. We've got Vegeta who starts as this is a villain, straight up villain, and then goes more anti-hero and then becomes hero. And he struggles with adapting his anger to the right place. And then finally does. And then, I don't, the newest stuff gets interesting with him. I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but there's, because the comics have kept going. But and you got Goku, like, he's angry at these people who want to destroy the Earth, and then his son Gohan, right? Like, literally coaching him and then coaching him from beyond the grave, and that male support and what to do with your anger, like defend the people that you care about. Like, what would have happened if it was, no, I don't want to upset anybody. That just doesn't work. The hero has to be willing to get angry.
Right.
Japanese know it. Superman gets angry. People don't like when Superman goes wild, though. He's got a different tint to him. People are very, very particular about their Superman.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. Good. This is my girlfriend's shirt. I've never watched Dragon Ball Z in my life. So
Oh, your girlfriend has good taste because, dude.
because she's
Okay,
dating me. Yeah.
listen, buddy. Let me say the
That's what I always say to her. I said, babe, you got the best taste. You got the best taste.
how, how did y'all meet?
We met on Twitter.
See, that's smart, man. Let me tell you that right now. That might be the way I go because I'm still on the market. So we're gonna see how it goes.
It's a good day nap. A lot of interest built in. A lot of interest built in. Jeremy, this was a pleasure, man. Thank you so much.
Pleasure's mine, man. We've been chatting, and I love bouncing off your ideas, and so this was just such a natural fit where we could do it. And I mean, it's a mile a minute. You make me think of so much. My favorite collaborations are with people who make me think of more that I want to write about, and this has been one of those occasions. So, and it's recorded, so I can go back. Oh yeah, I want to write. So I truly appreciate you, man, and what you're doing. We need your brother out here.
Likewise, man. I feel that as well. I feel that as well from you. Where can
Thank you.
people learn more about you, find your work, work with you? You got anything going on?
So people can find me here. PsychFox, PsychFox is my handle on most every platform. So I'm here. I'm on X. My big project now is putting more out about healthy masculinity and therapy and some evolutionary therapy stuff here and there. Putting ideas out. And so supporting me in that. requesting different things you like hearing therapists talk about, that's always enjoyable. I have a podcast and it's named Sanity and Society. I mean, you can catch that here. I've put a lot of that on Substack, and I've got videos on YouTube, TikTok, Fox as well. I put a lot out there, like funny skits on therapy styles and the cliche surrounding them. Like for brain spotting, I said that was oh, sorry about your depression. Can you just look up and to the left a little bit? So lots of funny little things out there on TikTok. But yeah, man, Psych Fox, I'm out there. Drop me a line, y'all. It's been great chatting.
Cool, brother. Awesome, man. Well, to be continued. Well, I'm sure we'll do it again.
One more thing, I do EMDR training as well for the therapists out there, so feel free to contact me for like EMDR consultation stuff. So, but yeah, man, I'd love to do this again and hear more and chop up more about this stuff and even about EMDR. So,
100%. Good. All right, Jeremy. Appreciate you, brother. Cheers.
thank you, sir. Appreciate
God
you.
bless. All right.
God, peace.
Easter. Yeah.